introduction. We have to come here to worship you, to praise you, to acknowledge you are our God. There is no other. To acknowledge you have saved us and no one else has. We have saved ourselves. There's the death of your Son on the cross and his resurrection and his saving us. And we have salvation. Lord, we thank you for that. We praise you for that. We thank you, God, how you revealed yourself to us. Make yourself known. So we can experience the awesome joy of walking with you and talking with you and living in your presence. Well, it's time for your honor and glory. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. 2 Samuel chapter 1. I have to call this transition because at this point David is going through several transitions in his life. This is a major one, going from exiled, persecuted believer to king. And I want to take some time this morning to focus on the transitions we've seen already in David's life, because they speak to us, they talk to us, and we get from the same situations and transitions. The setting in 2 Samuel chapter 1 is Saul has died and David has defeated the Amalekites and restored or recovered all the people that were taken. And they are now back in Ziklag, beginning in verse 1. Now it came about after the death of Saul, when David had returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, that David remained 2 days in Ziklag. On the third day, behold, a man came out of the camp from Saul with his clothes torn and dust on his head. And it came about when he came to David that he fell to the ground and prostrated himself. Then David said to him, "From where do you come?" And he said to him, "I have escaped from the camp of Israel." David said to him, "How did things go? Please tell me." And he said, "The people have fled from the battle, and also many people have fallen and are dead, and Saul and Jonathan and his sons are dead also." So David said to the young man who told him, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead?" The young man who told him said, "By chance I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and behold, Saul was leaning on his spear, and behold, the chariots and the horsemen pursued him closely. When he looked behind him, he saw me and called to me, and I said, 'Here am I.' And he said to me, 'Who are you?' And I answered him, 'I am an Amalekite.' Then he said to me, 'Please stand beside me and kill me, for the agony has seized me because my life still lingers in me.' So I stood beside him and killed him, because I knew that he could not live after he had fallen. And I took the crown which was on his head and the bracelet which was on his arm, and I have brought them here to my Lord." Then David took hold of his clothes and tore them, and so also did all the men who were with him. They mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and the people of the Lord and the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. David said to the young man, behold, who told him, "Where are you from?" And he answered, "I am the son of an alien and Amalekite." Then David said to him, "How is it you were not afraid to stretch out your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" And David called one of his young men and said, "Go, cut him down." So he struck him and he died. David said to him, "Your blood is on your head, for your mouth has testified against you, saying, 'I have killed the Lord's anointed.'" This is the setting of David's next transition, again, to that of being king. David's informed of Saul's death. He's back in Ziklag, has recovered again all that was stolen by the Amalekites. And the way the text reads is kind of interesting to me, because it sounds like David has come back from Ziklag, from the battle of the Amalekites, and he's just sitting there, waiting for something. And I suspect he's waiting for a word of the battle with Saul and the Israelites against the Philistines. He's waiting to know what his next move is going to be based on the outcome of that battle. David knew that the Philistine army was huge, much larger than the Israelite army, and he knew things probably would not go well for Israel. So he's just waiting for news. When the news comes from the messenger, well, he's ready for that. The messenger. Back in the day, messengers would run to deliver the message to whomever. And the idea was, when you got there and gave the message, you'd be rewarded for the run you just made, for the message you just brought to them. Unlike us, we don't have satellite communication, instant information on what happens around the world. It's funny, when something horrible happens, you're like, well, tell me what happened. We're kind of conditioned to expect immediate news coverage anywhere on the planet concerning world events. Well, David sat for 2 days and waited for someone to come from the battle and give him the information. This messenger came expecting to get rewarded financially. I think he wanted to pad his reward a little bit, so he lied and said, I killed Saul when he asked me to. So we know that's not how it happened. In chapter 31, 1 Samuel, Saul fell on his sword because armor-bearer would not kill him. So the messenger came, wants the reward, tries to get a bigger reward by saying he killed Saul. Don't miss the fact the man bringing news of the death of Saul is an Amalekite. Saul's disobedience that led to his misery and ultimately his death on Mount Gilboa in battle was because he refused to obey God and wipe out the Amalekites. So again, Saul's disobedience is being highlighted for us, the reader. We can't miss the fact, I believe Saul worshiped one true God, the one true God, but his disobedience led to misery because he never would obey God in that area of pleasing man instead of pleasing God. So don't miss it again. We're reminded of Saul's failure to obey, which led to his misery and ultimately his death in battle. David and his men mourned the death of Saul and Jonathan, verses 11 through 12. I think that was very real, sincere. The fact that Saul pursued David to kill him doesn't change the fact that when David came to live with Saul, Saul became like a dad to him, a mentor to him. He brought him from the shepherd's field to the king's palace. Saul did that. So I think David always had a unique relationship with Saul of love and respect and honor. We know that. He refused to kill him. He kills the man who said he killed Saul. He sees Saul as God's anointed. God handpicked Saul to be king. David respects that. David honors that. Even in Saul's death, David respects and honors that. So I think his mourning is sincere. I think he did love Saul in that respect, in that way. But also, he acknowledges Jonathan in his mourning. And we know that Jonathan was his best friend, closest friend he ever had in his life. Jonathan also a mentor who taught him how to be a man of royalty, if you will. Because when David came to the palace, it was Jonathan who clothed him and set him up, showed him how to act like the socialite, whatever it was, for the king's palace. And also became his very best friend for all of life. So David's mourning that we see in the text is very genuine and very real. It wasn't lip service because of whatever. And they also mourned the fact that much of Israel was wiped out by the Philistine army. David then writes a song to utilize, to do a eulogy, I can't say the word for some reason, for Saul and Jonathan in all of Israel. And for me, this is David's greatest gift that he is using here to honor Saul and Jonathan. See, David's greatest gift to us is not that as a husband or a dad or a king or a leader, but it's a songwriter leading in worship. What remains of David to this day? Not his palace, not his city. No, his songs. His songs we have written down in our Bible. So in verse 17 and following, David writes a psalm for Saul and Jonathan. Beginning in verse 17. Then David chanted with his lament over Saul and Jonathan his son, and he told them to teach the sons of Judah the song of the bow. Behold, it is written in the book of Jashar. Your beauty, O Israel, is slain on your high places. How have the mighty fallen? Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, or the daughters of the Philistines will rejoice. The daughters of the uncircumcised will exult. O mountain of Gilboa, let not dew or rain be on you, nor fields of offerings. For there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul not anointed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, and the sword of Saul did not return empty. Saul and Jonathan beloved and pleasant in their life, and in their death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you luxuriously in scarlet, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How have the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle? Jonathan is slain on your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You have been very pleasant to me. Your love to me was more wonderful than the love of women. How have the mighty fallen, and the weapons of war perished? David, I think, just pours his heart out there. He acknowledges and honors Saul as king, as a successful king who was fair to the people of Israel, who did his part as best he could, as called by God to be king of Israel. When he talks about Jonathan, it obviously is a very close relationship. And don't let the perversion of our culture cause you to read something perverted into the text. When he writes, your love is more beautiful or more wonderful than the love of a woman. To me, that communicates more of David's lack of knowing what marriage is than it is anything else. But David's point is very much this. They were a very, very close friendship. They were buddies. Envy David and Jonathan sometimes to have someone that close. But David acknowledges that and he honors that and he rejoices in that as he eulogizes both Saul and Jonathan in the psalm. For me, at this point in David's life, it's important to verbalize his honor and respect as well as his love for Saul and Jonathan, because David has been exiled from Israel, run out of town by Saul, labeled a criminal, a traitor of Israel and Saul. For David to genuinely show his heart publicly for the men around him who also were at odds with Saul is important, because when he goes back to Israel to be king, it needs to be seen as a man of honor and respect, not one of vengeance against Saul and Saul's family. So all that David's doing here is important to prepare what comes ahead for him as king. This is the setting of David's new transition. Again, he was labeled a traitor by Saul and exiled from Israel. Of course, David actually was being persecuted for his faithfulness in serving God. His success wasn't against Saul. His success was based on God's presence in his life. So he's being persecuted for his belief and his trust in serving God. This is a transition from labeled outlaw, to king of Judah, then king of Israel. We have read of 4 transitions in David's life. I'll look at those 4 this morning and then get to the one we're in now. The first transition in David's life is that from boy to young man. And you go back to the beginning of 1 Samuel, and we meet David as a shepherd boy with some sheep out in the field. The text doesn't come out and identify this transition from boy to young man. But if you read the context of it, to me it's a beautiful picture of David's transition from that of a boy, 10, 11, becoming a young man, 12 and older, which is the Hebrew custom. At 12, you're identified as a young man. And I want to bring this out because the way that it happens. When Samuel is told by God, go to Jesse in Bethlehem and anoint his son as king, Samuel goes. He tells Jesse why he's there. Jesse brings his oldest son. And Samuel thinks this is the one. And God says no. Well, then Jesse brings all the sons he invited to eat with Samuel, at this meal. And Samuel says, none of these are God's chosen. Did you not invite all of your sons to eat with me? And Jesse is like, no. That youngin' of mine, that little brat, we sent him out with the sheep and get rid of him, pretty much. They have to go get David from the fields with his sheep and bring him in. And when Samuel sees David, God says, this is the one. And Samuel anoints David to be king. Now, when David goes to the battle to give food to his brother where Goliath is, when he gets there, what does the oldest brother say to David? Why are you here? Did you come to watch? I know you and your insolence. Where are those few sheep you have? And you put the picture together, and you have Jesse with his sons, and then David. David's not really seen as Jesse's favorite, or even one that he cares too much about. It's kind of like, here's David. Here, David, take these sheep, go out in the field and feed them and take care of them. Let's get you out of our hair, if you will. So David is seen by his family as, well, the youngin'. And he just kind of underfoot, so gives him sheep to play with and send him out in the wilderness to play with his sheep. And David does that. So how is David growing up? He's a shepherd boy with a handful of sheep that he takes care of. We know he kills a bear, he kills a lion to defend his sheep. Takes his job as shepherd very seriously. We see David by himself with his sheep as a boy and becoming a man. By the time David gets there to kill Goliath, he is a young man. He's not an 8-year-old. He's 12 or older, which is manhood beginning in the Hebrew culture. So the transition for David from boy to young man is not in his house with his dad or older brother. He's by himself in the fields with his sheep. Who is there to help David transition from young boy to young man? Well, you read David's story, you read David's Psalms, and you get a very clear picture that while David's in the wilderness with his sheep, he is spending most of his time worshiping, glorifying, in amazement of God and God's creation. His Psalms, they talk about the stars in the sky, how magnificent they are. David connects with God as a boy, and it is God who is there who walks into the transition from boy to young man. And I emphasize that because in a minute it comes back to David. I emphasize that also because we all have transitions in our life. And God may put a person there to help us walk through it, or it may just be you and God. For me, from boy to young man, it was just me and God. My dad, no means to dishonor him, worked and then worked to a second job and then worked at the house. I mean, he was always working. That's just who he was. It wasn't really someplace a boy would want to be. I mean, I often would ride with him sometimes as a boy, which is kind of cool, but there wasn't that real connection of walking you through life because he worked nonstop. For me, my transition from boy to young man was totally me and God, and I'm thankful for that because God truly blessed in that relationship that I developed as a kid, which has lasted until today, and I'm almost 47 or so. Or 50-something or so. But that foundation that David got by himself with those sheep in the fields, just he and God, is the foundation that made him the great king that he was, is the foundation that caused God to say he is a man after God's own heart. David fell in love with God by himself in the fields watching his sheep. And I had the opportunity to have those field events in my younger days, which led me to God and created a foundation that has never wavered throughout all of life. So David is blessed, I think, and then his first major transition is just he and God. And that's something that lasts with him forever. The second transition David goes through is from shepherd, young man, to living in the king's palace. When he leaves the sheep behind to go and see the battle where Goliath is, it is there in the battle with Goliath that the young man David demonstrates his courage as well as his very strong, faithful walk with God, and he kills Goliath. And Saul does what? Saul grabs David and brings David into his house, and David never goes back home to his sheep. He now lives with Saul until Saul runs him out, and he's exiled. The transition from shepherd to royal palace is not one to take lightly. David goes from nobody, literally, David goes from nobody watching his sheep by himself to the biggest celebrity in all of Israel. He is a bigger celebrity than Saul, the king, is. That's a huge transition that in most cases would explode your head with pride and arrogance and greed and power. But when David enters that transition, God puts a man in his life to walk him through it, and that man is Jonathan. Jonathan comes alongside David. They become very close friends. Jonathan clothes him, tells him how to dress as a royal person, how to act, how to eat, how to live, how to respond. Jonathan walks David through the transition from shepherd to royalty. And that's interesting to me, because there are some things in life that just you and God can walk through no problem whatsoever. But there are other things in life, God knows I need someone to come alongside me to help guide me in the ways of how to do this. And for David, he never would have figured out how to be royalty without Jonathan. Jonathan was raised on an estate. Saul's dad was wealthy. They had an estate. We meet Saul going out to try and find some donkeys that escaped. Well, Saul had a servant with him. David has no servant with him watching sheep. He's by himself. Saul has some idea of how a household with order and authority works. David's in the field with the sheep. His understanding of authority is his dad said, get out of here. Go play with the sheep. So David needs that guide to help him transition from shepherd to living in the king's palace. And Jonathan is that man who does that. So again, as you think about transition in your life, it may be just you and God walking through a transition. That's outstanding. That's awesome. But oftentimes God will put a person in your life to help you make that transition. For me, I hit young manhood, just me and God, but the next step, getting into manhood and the things of the world, God put a man in my life who helped me walk through that. And that man is my granddad. He had the same back issues I have, retired on disability, sat in his house pretty much all the time, so he was always available for me. When I skipped college classes at SCCJ, between classes, I never skipped. I would go to his house and hang out with him. And we talked about everything under the sun. He was that person that God put in my life, that older voice to give me wisdom in life's transitions. That is Jonathan for David at this point. When David becomes a huge celebrity and Saul becomes jealous and Saul decides David's out to get him, he runs David out of his household and eventually out of the country. Now when David runs, where does he run to? This transition is probably the most volatile transition for David, from being in the king's palace to being in exile. David runs first to Samuel. We have no idea what Samuel said to David. But apparently it didn't do much good because David kept running. He didn't know what to do. Jonathan came to David after he started running. And Jonathan gave him some encouragement also. But all Jonathan could do was encourage him to hang in there, which is probably what Samuel did. David eventually goes to the southern part of the kingdom where he continues doing what he's been doing. In chapter 23 of 1 Samuel, David fights to deliver Keilah from raiders. That's what he was doing with Saul, fighting against the enemies of Israel. But once that is done, he now lives in the wilderness, and the best he can do is be a good neighbor. David and Nabal. David's being a good neighbor. I think everybody in the area lives in safety because David and his men ensure no one raids the area because they're afraid of David. So David is doing the best he can in transition here to survive and also be a good neighbor. He's a good neighbor to Nabal. When Nabal insults David, calls him a nobody, worthless nothing, David in his pride decides, you know what? I'm the law here. I answer to nobody. You're not going to call me that and make fun of me without there being some consequences. In fact, the consequence is I'm going to come kill you and every man in your household. And David goes to do that. See, the transition from king's palace to, bandit, exile, David's not doing well here. He's letting his pride get the best of him. He's going to do something in sin, murder a man in his household. God sends someone to David in this transition to walk him through the transition from royalty to exile. And that person is Abigail. Who responds to David when he comes to kill Nabal? Abigail. Who has words of wisdom for David during this transition? Abigail. What's Abigail say? She says, look, when you post this on social media, it'll come back and bite you one day. Right? She says, if you go and do what you want to do to Nabal, which he probably deserves it, it's not going to be good for you down the road when you become king. It will haunt you. It'll be a stain on your record. Murderer, thief, thug, raider, bum. Abigail's the one who brings wisdom to David during this time. None of his men do. They are all eager to go fight. Abigail's the one that God puts in David's life for transitioning down from royalty to exile. And she brings a voice of wisdom. And when Nabal falls over and dies, David marries Abigail. And the 10 plus years he's in the wilderness experience, Abigail is there as that voice of civility, if you will, for David. He never becomes a raiding thug, never becomes a raiding thief or murderer or bandit. He stays civil the whole time he's in this transition from royalty to exile. That is because of Abigail's voice in his life. That's kind of cool to me. He wasn't looking for anybody, didn't expect anybody, but God knew the situation, and God put a voice there to keep David making those mistakes that would haunt him the rest of his life. that is God, and that person is Abigail. The last transition is what we're in today in chapter 1, verse of 2 Samuel, and that is David going from exile to king. When this happens, David hears Saul's dead, Jonathan's dead, the sons are dead. David knows that the time for him to become king is arrived. He was anointed by Samuel to be king. So David now must transition from exiled to king. Who does God put in his life to do that? None of his men are worthy to do that. Abigail can't do that. Jonathan's dead. He would have been the one to do that. Who walks David through this process? God does. And here's where it's key. This is a very pivotal point in David's life of how to move forward in receiving the kingship of all of Israel. It can be a horrendous battle event, which it kind of does because of Abner's mistake. There's Abner making a mistake again. But David doesn't just run into it. In fact, in chapter 2 of 2 Samuel, in very first 1, it says, David inquired the Lord, saying, shall I go? David doesn't make a move about becoming king of Israel without asking God. God is the one who walks David through this process. And here's what's important. David asks God what to do, and God tells David what to do. David speaks to God, and God speaks to David, and David hears God. And I emphasize that because our culture today mocks you if you say God speaks to you. Make no mistake. If I am a believer and Jesus Christ is in my heart, I speak to God and He hears me, and God speaks to me and I hear Him. It's as real as me hearing you speak. God is real. My relationship with God is real. David could speak to God here and know God's voice because David knew God when he was a boy. And when he transitioned to a young man, it was God who walked him through it. David knows how to interact with God. When I was born as a baby, I was born speaking Latin. I speak it very clearly. Everyone else me speak Latin. That's your attention? When I was born, I didn't speak anything but just a noise. I didn't understand anything but just a noise. Right? When we're born, we don't speak or we don't hear. We hear to understand. It's a learning process of how to communicate in language. When I was saved, I had no idea how to hear God speak to me spiritually. It was a learning process. He understood me clearly because He is God. And when I prayed and when I spoke, He understood me clearly. When He spoke to me in the beginning, almost all of it was in here. The Bible is how God speaks to us as believers throughout our lives, especially as new believers. But as I grow closer in my relationship with God, I begin to develop a relationship with God, and I understand how He communicates to me. I have 3 kids and a wife. We all communicate differently. There's lots of similarities, but also there's differences, unique to each one of us. I uniquely communicate with God. You uniquely communicate with God. Something I learned as a pastor, which I kind of learned slowly, was I want everyone to be able to communicate with God as I do. Well, that's only partly correct. It'll never be as I do, because God uniquely speaks to me as me. He will uniquely speak to you as you. So what I want is for you to figure out how to uniquely communicate with God. And we figure that out through our relationship with Him. And that, for me, would bring this every day. My goal, since I was 10, has been a chapter a day. And that doesn't mean reading the one verse chapter in Psalm over and over. It's a chapter a day. When I was a kid, when I made my Christian of faith, well, I believe that meant something. And they used to have the envelopes in the Baptist church. You checked off giving, read your Bible today, studied your lesson, right? Well, I saw it when it thought, well, I can check off what I'm doing. So I read my Bible daily. That's why I started doing it, to check that off. So I had something going on, and it just became a habit that I can't shake if I want to. I read a chapter a day, every day. That's not too much. It's not too little. Usually it's enough to grab my attention to be with something you think about and meditate on the rest of the day if I want to. God speaks to his word. But that process began a process of building a relationship with God where I can be anywhere in this planet, in any situation, and I can verbally speak to God, and he will speak to my heart and my soul and my spirit. Because his spirit is right here and speaks to me. That's where David was in his text. Now, the spirit went inside of him because Jesus said, "Thou cross you." But he and God communicate because that relationship was built when David was a young boy in the field with his sheep, singing praises to God and to God's creation. So what he started as a boy clings to him his whole life. So David is never in a place where he can't speak to God or hear God. And that's the whole joy of the text. If I sincerely seek God and to know him, I am never without him. And the younger I do that, the more real it's going to be when I'm 50-something years old. Jesus says, "Have the faith of a child." Well, a child's faith is totally unwavering, 100%. You can't shake it. As you get older, you get dumber. We say we get smarter. Actually, we get dumber. We don't relate to God the same way anymore. We're so dumb. Be smart. Be dumb. The more academically stuff I get in my head, the less I communicate with God. But if I have that childlike faith of when I was a child and I've heard my whole life, that's me. And I was communicating with God. And that's David. The transitions he went through are off the charts of one individual. But he's always there. He's always got God with him. And he hears God and he responds to God. So the point this morning is we will go through transitions in life. Make sure you do it with God. If we're blessed that God will do it that with us a certain way, he'll put someone in our life. Maybe a parent, a grandparent for me, whomever. A wife, a spouse. God is walking with us. It is just me and him, which I like the best because it's just all me and him. Or me and him and a third person he puts there to help me with something specific. That's David's life. And to this point, we come to 2 Samuel chapter 1, and to me that's the big transition moment. Everything in the past leads down to him being king. And God and he walk together in that awesome love relationship. And they stay in his life. So I close with, do you have that awesome relationship with God? May he talk to you definitely. That is my prayer for you. That you have everything I do and say in life is to hopefully to encourage and influence you to pursue that. Get into that. And enjoy it. There's no greater joy than your relationship with God. Nothing. Let's pray. And Father, we do thank you for the opportunity we have again to come here, to study your word, to read your text, to hear you speak to us through your text, and hopefully through your pastor as well. Father, I pray you would draw us to you, open our eyes and our hearts and our minds to you, to who you are, your great love for us, to try to know us, to walk with us, to work through us, to save us, to transform us, in the years. Bless this church for your honor and your glory. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.